not sitting there in his house by himself screaming at me.
Oh
yes, this is an unclean house. Remember what this does. It is not sin in the sense, but he is sitting here. Remember, unclean does not equal sin. Okay? It's uncleanliness. It's about purity. All of a sudden, he is sectioned off, but it has a similar consequence. He is separated from the tabernacle. He cannot go to temple. He cannot partake in the sacrifices. He can pray from where he is, but he's not included as in the people.
So he's protecting his kinsmen.
But also, if you've got a swine flu, you're not going to put a banner outside your house and say, I've got swine flu, I
can't
You should.
You sit down, you build a banner. You warn the people around you just to make sure that you separate. You don't contaminate anybody else. Alright? You don't want to get to the place where they are being separated from God. Okay? This affliction is your clothing. Your clothing, in clothing or wool cloth or linen, either with a woof of linen or with a wool or in leather or anything made of leather. The affliction shall be greenish or reddish. Even your clothes get fungus. Can you imagine? The green or red fungus in your clothing. Generally not a good thing to wear. Leather on the wool or the woof or in any item of leather, it is an affliction of leprosy. It will be shown to the priest, and the priest will see the affliction, and it shall be shut out from the affliction 7 days. Okay? Remember, they are going through the wilderness. They're going to be dealing with this for a while. This is a very real thing. If you get mold and stuff on your clothes or in your tent, it spreads. The bacteria in the air will affect your lungs. It will make you sick and could kill you. Okay? So we need to be very vigilant on what is around us in our tent, because I'm not only thinking of my family, but I'm thinking of the guy next door. Right? God is knitting together a community here, where before it was basically every Jew for himself. If you did it this way, you did it this way. Some of them still believed in God, some of them didn't. You were governed by Egyptian law. It was their responsibility to enforce it, not yours. I believe God here isn't saying, you need to look to your own house first, and you need to start respecting what's going on in your house, because you love your family and you love your neighbors. If I do not take care of my home, I could affect my neighbors next door. Some of us would say, no, they're not very nice people, so that's not what God expects. Okay? It is about community living. Alright? So the same thing will go in place. You will inspect it. They will put it away for 7 days. They will do whatever they need to do. Verse 55. And the priest shall see the affliction, and it shall be washed. Here, if the affliction is not changed in appearance, and the affliction will not have spread, it is impure, and you shall burn it with fire. It is a deterioration in its bald head and forehead. What do you guys have there? Verse 55.
After the affected article has been washed, the priest is to examine it.
Yeah.
And if the mildew has not changed its appearance, even though it has not spread, it is unclean. Burn it with fire, whether the mildew has affected one side or the other.
One side or the other.
This one refers to it as plague.
It's probably more mold, right? You're dealing with times where it all might be, most of the guys say there's mold.
But Vince, if I get an infectious disease and I've shoved out of the plant, I'm going to take something. I don't want to
like, oh, swine flu. Hey! You know what?
I'm going to break my nails.
We're going to stand on this side, you stand over there, we'll wait for you. Right? Okay, so it's just basically in the front or the back of whatever you're wearing, if it is spread, okay? If the priest will see it again, that the infection has become dim after it is washed, then he shall rip it from the clothing or from the leather or from the wool. So basically he'll tear it away. If it will appear again in the clothing or in the wool or the roof, if the item leather is interesting. It is developing, you shall burn it, distinguish the infection is in fire. Okay, so basically you need to get rid of it. This is the instruction of leprosy of clothing, wool, linen, or wool or woof of any item of leather to identify it as pure or impure. Okay. No questions, no thoughts. You guys good? And it's pretty simple. Once you understand what leprosy or the Torah could affect and how it is and what the point of this chapters are, we can jump right into everything. Alright, now we go into something else.
God's word clear?
The focus is strong. Okay, so now it talks about the purification, chapter 14. It talks about the purification of the leper. How are we going to do this? What has to happen if someone is pure and then they come back into this thing, alright? I have basically broken this down. Okay, you guys, you've done more or less the homework. Yes. Okay, really good. And Hashem's what the words are saying, there shall be the instruction for the leper in the day of his purification. He shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go outside the camp as the priest shall see, and if yet the infection of leprosy has been healed from the leper, then the priest shall command that he shall take sacrifice. Okay? So, first thing, the priest has to go outside of the camp to inspect. He's not allowed to come back in, he will go outside and he will inspect him and see if he is clean. Alright? Once he is considered clean, he gives a sacrifice. Okay? Can you give me the breakdown of things that need to be sacrificed?
One of the birds looks in a clay pot over running water.
How many birds?
Two.
Two birds. Alright, so we've got two birds.
Cedar wood.
Alright, next.
Cedar wood.
Cedar. Next.
Scarlet yarn.
Scarlet yarn.
Hyssop.
Yes, sir.
Hyssop leaves.
It's a double SOB, eh?
Yes, yeah.
H-Y, this is
What else?
And then a clay pot.
A bird for what offering?
sin offering.
Sin and? There's two birds.
For the one is like the one for the same thing, is it not? What?
I don't know. Tell me, read your Bibles. Tell me. Tell me.
He stays one of the two.
Guilt offering.
One is a...
Sin and guilt.
Okay? So, the one bird, all of a sudden gets put with clay container with living water in it. Living water means what to me?
Purification.
Purification. I thought all water was living. It's not true.
No, it's like a free word.
Most of it
It's
Blessed.
been what?
blessed.
No, that's holy water. It
Clean
doesn't
water.
exist in
It
this.
doesn't come from a system.
Because
Doesn't come from a system. What happens to system water? Gets stagnant, gets dusty, gets this lovely layer that sits on top of the water, so you're actually going to go down and dig underneath. But you know what? If it's a drought and you're living in the desert, this stuff will keep you alive. But it is not fresh flowing out of the ground. It's not pure. It's not right. And living water, someone try and give me the Hebrew. What's water in Hebrew?
Mine.
Ma'im. And what do I say when I toast?
L'chaim.
L'chaim. So, Ma'im Chaim. Okay? So, living water appears in our text, and it's very interesting because this term, I want you to, if you got a second, Jeremiah 17, verse 13. Jeremiah 17, verse 13. Thank you, Liz. It's good. Chapter 17, verse 13. Now, while you guys are taking a picture, living water was used for any mikvah. When you would go and you would be ritually cleansed or pure, they would make sure that that water that they got was come. If they made their own container, they would go and fetch living water from a stream, from a spring, from something like that, and then they would go and they would purify. They would never use cistern water. Okay, remember, sometimes cisterns got corrupted because when the wadis would flood, okay, you have this massive downpour. Remember what I said to you, in Israel, a lot of people, more people die by hiking in the wilderness and they get washed away by a flash flood than they do by car accidents or something silly like that. Okay? It floods up. They would basically make a channel in a wadi, they would carve it into the rock and at a slight gradient all the way around. They would bring it into a place and then they would drop it into a little hole. Now this hole would go into a cistern, which is basically, depending on how much money you have and how many people you want to look after, a massive hole in the section. It was big enough, some of them had steps to go down, but it was plastered all the way around. Okay, that's why you identify a cistern quickly in Israel because it's the only thing that's got plaster on. So as this thing is plastered all the way around, it's there to keep everything nice and sealed. And once, with as little light as possible, why do I keep light out of water? Yeah, you don't want it to grow fungus, okay, mold and grossness, algae that forms on top. But sometimes when you have a flash flood, it might pick up an animal, okay, get washed in, animal drowns, and then all of a sudden, you don't know, you go in there because it's a water storage. You go over there, you see this thing floating on top of the water. Is this thing a good thing for a mikvah? No. And you pull out all that gunky stuff on top of that nice big stagnant layer of dust. Maybe you go through a dust storm, which is quite common when you go into the wilderness. You pour it out into this water and you go, please, mikvah yourself and go to the temple of God. Not so good, yes? They would make living water, mayim chaim, okay? And yeah, listen to this. This word mikvah, okay, or mikweh, actually has a funny word on the play, source. Source of living water, okay? And I want you to listen to what Jeremiah says. Hope of Israel, Adonai. Okay, so it's a play on living water, right? Exalted from the beginning, our holy sanctuary, hope of Israel, Adonai. Oh wait, sorry. I'm reading the wrong thing. Hope of Israel, Adonai. All who abandoned you will be ashamed. Those who leave you will be inscribed in the dust, because they have abandoned Adonai, the source of living water. Heal me, Adonai, and I will be healed. Save me, and I will be saved. For you are my praise. Remember when Yeshua was writing in dust? And they brought that lady that was caught in adultery? Written in the dust. It's an interesting little play. Okay?
Where's Jeremiah what?
Jeremiah 17, verse 13.
Sorry, also written in the dust is not forgotten, because the minute the wind blows, it blows it away. The carpenter stone is stone.
Yes, yeah, to a point, but I also think he was making a nice little play of saying Adamah. Right? When you come in here and you say, you Adam, who comes from Adamah, dust, who are you to judge anybody? If you cast the first stone, were you without sin? You are nothing but dust. And strange, I thinking that you are something special, but you're not. The only reason you're special is because God made you and He chose you. Nothing you've done. You're a glorified mudball. Sorry for you. Okay? But God loves you anyway. Right? So, He takes us to priests, He takes us klepot, they put in living water. Okay? What happens next? Right? You kill the one bird over the clay pot so blood gets caught into the water, right? Then you do what?
Take the living bird.
Yes.
Dip in.
So you're sprinkling what on a leper?
Blood.
Bloody water. Living water with a little bit of the blood on the sacrifice.
Which is life.
Okay?
That's gross.
What's interesting is
So it's doing good.
the scarlet and the hyssop.
Scarlet. Scarlet and hyssop. What do they do with the scarlet and the cedar?
That's
Hold
the.
it with the bird.
So they take one of the birds and they
Dip it in.
so they take cedar, piece of wood. Is cedar cheap wood?
No.
No, it's imported wood. Very fancy, fancy wood. Okay? Why? What does cedar? What properties does cedar have that they would?
Hard.
They want? Hard.
Smells
Very
good scent.
It's got a good sense. Okay?
Maybe take the smell of the blood away.
It's actually got a funny enough an insect repellent. Okay, and it's also evergreen, so they can use it all year round. Okay? So they would take it, they would tie this bird with a scarlet yarn. Okay? And they would dip it in this blood water and then they would go. And I have to see
Special
They would use the bird with the water. Am I right or am I wrong? What does it say in your Bible?
Dip it in.
Yeah.
Dip the bird
In
in.
the living water.
With the living water, and you would sprinkle it towards this leper. And
Yeah.
I've got this idea of this flapping chicken. Sorry, it's way off. That is a rather random thing. Okay, maybe that's why they tie it down so it can't flap. Okay? They sprinkle this bird with this blood living water. Okay? Hyssop?
It's the same thing that was used for Passover, painting the door frame, and for Yeshua on the cross with the vinegar.
Wow,
They
okay.
also sprinkle it.
Used for sprinkling, but what else? What properties? Think physical.
I don't know.
Antibacterial.
Antibacterial, just for cleansing. So he's not only giving him an insect repellent, but he's also giving him an antibacterial, but he's also giving him blood and water on a piece of wood.
Feeds from the bird.
Who died on a piece of wood that was given hyssop that was clean?
Yeah.
That's purification.
What's the scarlet thread again?
Where was scarlet thread used?
It was on the wall, wasn't it? For that lady who let them in.
Well, the you could use that was as a sign off.
You're sure it's got well, in a robe and a crown of thorns on it?
Yeah, but that would be more purple.
Oh, the scapegoat around his neck.
The scapegoat that was tied, so you could separate the scapegoat on Yom Kippur, which one was for Azazel and which one would be used as an offering.
Yes.
He's tying in here crucifixion, Yom Kippur, purification, sin offerings, all of these things sort of like fold in nicely together. What he's showing you is that purification, that thing that will take you from impure to pure. I believe he's telling you is this is what the Messiah does for us. He takes us from unclean to clean. And then his anointing falls onto you through the Ruach of Hadesh, and you become holy. The dove. There's some nice pretty pictures, right? How many of you read this stuff and went,
Yeah.
Look at the imagery of what he's given. And he sprinkled 7 times, and then they take the bird and they let it go in an open field.
7 times is completion, so it's complete.
Purification is done.
It's done.
So when Yeshua died on the cross,
It is done.
it is done. Because birds has a problems. But he's happy he's been let free now.
Those will have major issues after
Okay, then what? What happens to this leper? This guy would do what? He would go and wash his clothes and he would stay at the camp for 7 days. And then he would do what? And he would shave all his hair off. Eyebrows, beard, hair on his head. He would shave everything so that people would see, there's maybe not some punkas hiding behind the bushy eyebrows. Okay? He's completely shaved. And remember, this is kind of Egyptian, eh?
Sure.
I will take you from that point and you will be re-engrafted into back into the dwelling place, back into God. Alright, and then what happens?
On the 8th day,
You what? On the 8th day he takes
female lambs.
2 male lambs. Okay? He takes 2 rams in their first year and does what? What are the instances where it gets thrown in? Takes 2 rams,
One with you.
rams, 1 ewe.
What for the shame?
How do you spell ewe?
Yeah.
Right.
Obviously,
Alright, 1 ewe. And then what else?
10th of it. 3/10 of an effort.
Flour,
Flour.
Oil,
oil,
And a log of oil.
and a log of oil, separate. How much is a log of oil?
2/3
300
pounds.
milliliters.
300 grams, that's exactly. Yeah?
Or 10 ounces.
I was going to say it's a lot.
2/3 of a pound.
20 pounds.
Okay? A log of oil, basically some say around about half a liter, okay? Alright? And then what does he do? Guilt offering? Guilt offering?
Wave offering. Sin offering.
There's a trespass offering.
Guilt? Trespass?
Wave.
Wait? What verse?
We have 12
Wave
and a sin. Sin
Oh,
offering.
guilt, trespass. Where's dedication?
Burnt offering.
Way off. So you take this person, you rededicate, you deal with their sin, you rededicate them, and you wave them before God. This is what you are. This is what I bring to you, Lord. Your Son is returned. Okay, makes sense. Okay, flour.
That's part of the wave, isn't it?
Looking for imagery, man. Give me imagery. Oil.
sustenance.
Your bread.
That is anointing. The bread, the daily provision, it's your mincha, alright?
And burning and to burn the candles, the oil.
It's a bottom line, yes. Okay? So you would have to use a little bit of oil with the flour so that it burns. Okay? Practical applications. Alright? To remind you of the daily bread, that you're part of this camp that God will provide for you. And you can take the oil, which is part of an anointing. You are set apart. You're no longer unclean, but you are holy. Now listen, what does he do? He takes the blood and what?
So, right here.
Right here, right thumb, right big toe. Okay, where else have we heard this?
That's anointing a king.
Levitical priesthood.
Levitical priesthood. This is Aaron and his sons, not just everybody. Aaron and his sons. He does the same cleansing. So it's not, can you imagine? You're sitting over there, you've been excluded from the camp completely. But they basically do the same rite that he did for Aaron as high priest. Not what I hear. How I do and what I walk.
It's to realign you guys.
Isn't that like a spiritual connection where like the blood opens your ears and like helps to guide you and you?
You can hear in a sense. It's a physical reminder.
Is it also
Shema
connecting?
Israel. Shema Israel means I will listen and do. Make
Hear
experience
about
and my feet. Eyes on the physical walk. Go to it. I will obey. I will move forward. And then he takes the oil and he pours it into his left hand and he takes his right finger and he sprinkles it on this guy. And then he does the same thing. Yeah. You have been consecrated. You have been dedicated. You are now holy. Can you imagine when you left the camp screaming unclean? Unclean. Unclean. And now you're standing before God and He says, you are pure, you are bought with price, your blood. This blood is going to cleanse you, and now you are consecrated, you are dedicated, you are mine. Can you imagine putting yourself in that situation? How long have you been outside the camp?
At least 7 days.
How? Easiest. In the wilderness? By yourself? What happens if you get to the promised land? How can you be part of those people but you're not part of those people? So with a spiritual application, let's think about it. Your corruption has caused you to be kicked outside of God's presence. You cannot go up to temple. You cannot go spend time with Him. You cannot thank Him for anything because your corruption has kept you out. How many times have we gone through this where we had to stop and we had to think, oh God, how far have I run from you? Please cleanse me, please fix me, please help me, forgive me for what I've done. And I come back into the presence and all of a sudden, this relationship where you were running from God is now all of a sudden welcome back. Make sure you hear me. Make sure you do what I asked you to do. Shema. Let me see your walk before. What does it say in what's it first? I think this is John. Blessed are those who hear the word of the Lord and do them. And do it. You put it into practice. Shabbat is not Shabbat just because God wants Shabbat. Shabbat is for you. And it's a covenant. It's a sign of a covenant that helps you set things apart. These mitzvahs are for you. Listen. Do. So that others may see your walk. Before you got to God, you were unclean. You were broken and you were not welcome in the camp because of your corruption, your contagious behavior. All the bad things that I used to do, I infected everybody else around me. You could not sit in a bar with Vince without getting a couple of shots. It was no way. You either drank it or you wore it. And I was, they had it in common. If Vince was getting buchai, you all are joining me. And we drank. And because we drank, everybody got drunk. And everybody climbed into their cars. And everybody drove home. Sometimes to their children. Baruch Hashem, not one of them are not there. Baruch Hashem, not one of them were killed in the car accident. Baruch Hashem, that I was not killed in the car accident. My corruption spread to my people around my house. Now, when it changes, I come into the presence of God, I think, I hear the mitzvah. I worry about what my hands do. I worry about what my feet are doing. I'm trying to put this stuff as best as I can into practice. The Yisrat Hashem, with the help of God and the power of the Ruach HaKodesh, each day trying to get better and better at what I'm doing and how I'm walking and being more clear and concise about how I'm practicing what is necessary. And as I go through this, I have to continually inspect why I'm doing things. It is so quickly to get stuck into the world's idea of what should be. Listen, why aren't you opening up more branches and why aren't you buying more machines? Well, because I know if we do, we're probably going to make more money. Why do you want more money, Vince? Oh, but I want to help people. Is that true? Is what you have enough? Has God told you to do that? No. So why are you doing it?
I sort of found the birds. Where do they go? I picture myself the desert. I can't think that there's going to stop there.
Remember, this was only, there would have been traders coming back and forth. Pigeons were also used as letter carriers. When you go to a place, when we go to Israel, there's a place called Beit Kruvim. In Beit Kruvim, they've got what's called a calumbrium. A calumbrium is basically a massive pigeon coop that was made up of it's shaped in two crosses. And it's literally little holes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. The thing goes higher than this. And it's a pigeon house. And they would use it for sacrifices. You would be able to buy them for sacrifices, and you would be also be able to use them to post. So every time you went to Jerusalem, you would get letters because the pigeons were trained to fly to and back from there. Right? And then they also had all this work on the floor, which they used as fertilizer. It was a wonder. Okay, but you would be able to get it. Right? So, you're coming home. You're accepted, you're atoned for. And what's really cool about this thing is God says, oh, by the way, if you can't afford a couple of lambs and a couple of ewes or an ewe, don't worry, bring some birds. We'll make a plan for you. Even the poor won't be excluded. I love that. Okay? Now that goes into the same sort of procedure when you start looking at verses 33, when you start looking at a house. Okay, you go to your house and all of a sudden it gets infected. You call a priest. He goes, all right, what are we going to do? Says, there's the fungus, scrape it off. Okay, so you will scrape it. In case if you had plastered it or sealed it, you would have to chip that away and you would get down to the brick. Alright? You would leave it. Everything that you had in that house you would take out and you would separate it so that you don't get infected inside or anything that you have doesn't become unclean. Okay? Everybody moves out. Deal with it to see if it's like a green or red fungus. You will seal the house for 7 days. You will then remove the stones that have the fungus. Take it out completely and you take it to a place of uncleanliness outside the camp. You get rid of the unclean stuff. Okay? Make sure that the dust and that is all around it. You replaster it. If it comes back, what do you do? You've already taken out the stones. You need to destroy the house. Okay? You do not allow anything that is unclean. Start again.
Vincent, were they in tents though?
Remember, this was a mitzvah for when you went into Israel as well.
Okay.
Okay? Similar thing applies. That's why it goes into the fabric. It's not just what you wear. If the tent wall comes in, you scrape it or you tear it off, and then you're just going to have to repatch it. So if a certain section of the weave is not right, guess what happens? Take it out, wash it, doesn't work, set it on fire. Thank you very much. I'm going to have to replace the section.
Mold can make you very sick.
Sorry?
Mold can make you very sick.
So it's a very physical, makes a lot of physical sense.
Yeah.
Also at the same time, you know, you don't want mold growing up in your house. I mean, you watch all this, I don't know how many of you guys watch that extreme, extreme homemaker. Yeah, and they're putting in, you check out the mold in the thing because of the wooden houses in the States, and that actually causes their children to get worse and worse and worse and worse. They literally have to gut that place. They chop out everything, and if anything has an inkling of mold, they don't even try. They just get rid of the whole thing. They break that whole house down and they rebuild it from scratch. Okay? Same biblical principles used in homemakers. Okay. You replace it, build it, and then you go in. The priest comes out. If it's okay, it's clean. Alright? You wash your clothes, you deal with whatever you have to, then you can live and eat there, whatever the case goes through. Okay? Then all of a sudden, to cleanse or to purify your house, the same procedure is taking place. Exactly the same procedure. Birds, clay pot, living waters. God is your source. He will cleanse you. He will make the place in which you dwell safe and secure, similar to the hyssop on the doorpost. You're saying, no death will enter that anymore. Okay? It's about cleansing. It's about purification. But notice that living water, God is your source. Through His blood you will be purified. You will receive life. Don't you ever forget that. Hear me now, a lot of people are going through some very rough times. I believe Hasatan is busy poking people, pushing them to their limits, and they're sitting there banging their heads against the wall because they're either too busy or they're being hammered left, right, and center. I don't know what you're going through, but listen to me. We're crossing borders. Things are going on where God is going to push you a little bit, and Job says, you know, he counts it, I'm paraphrasing, go look it up. He counts it good for all the trials and testing that he goes through, because when he is done, he will be purified as gold. This purification process is necessary because what is coming is going to need us to be stronger, need us to be better, need us to be in place. All of these mitzvahs, the mitzvah had to be in place, so when I moved into the promised land, I knew about community. I knew about my family. I knew about sickness. I knew about what I should do, how I should act, how I should love, how I should worship. But one thing I will never forget is my Mayim, my source of hope, my living water. This is what I make for myself. It is too easy to look at your hands and go, how am I going to fix this? Remember the portion this week for those who came on Wednesday. Isaiah looked at Hezekiah. When he knew Assyria was coming, he fixed the breaches in the walls, he built Hezekiah's tunnel, he pulled in all the waters and all the rest of it, and Isaiah walked up to him and goes, wow, you did all of that, you've forgotten God. It doesn't matter how strong your walls are, my boy, it doesn't matter where you hide your water. If you do not have God, nothing is going to help. Rather fix your eyes on God and let Him take care of the rest. When Hezekiah realized that, he cried out to God. One angel, 185,000 bloodthirsty trained killers, waiting for an opportunity. Kill you slowly, take you off to trade. Do whatever I can. Assyria was one of the most brutal armies in their time. In the world, they were known to God because they were bloodthirsty. One angel, 185,000 dead. One. What are you facing that God cannot fix? Don't look to your own hands, look to your source. Okay? Whatever needs to happen is going to happen. Satan cannot stop that. Because we're not trying to do it ourselves. We know we cannot. God is going to do it. Amen? Okay. Alright. Soft past. Let's do... Right. Give me 5 more minutes at a time. Okay? Chapter 15 talks about weird bodily discharges. Rather random, okay? Fine. Yeah. So if you're a guy walking around and then all of a sudden there's this weird emission coming from you in certain places, okay? I'm using the PG version here. Notice it is a random emission. Oh, my bad. Random emission. You are unclean. If you're leaking from certain places, I would generally think there would be something wrong. Okay? So, there's problems with your downstairs. Okay? Generally, I've put in brackets here, leaking people. Go look for a priest. That's a problem. Okay? You will be considered unclean. And it's the same sort of contamination. Remember, anything that is unclean is the same sort of stuff that you're talking about when you touch a dead body. God puts it in the same category. Right? what? There is something wrong, needs to be fixed. Do not contaminate other people. You don't know what you have. Let God be the judge and purify you, okay? So, if you have leaking things, what you do, you wash the places where you stand, everything that you touched is unclean. If someone, I like this verse, if someone spat on you, this is a kind of a random thing, must be a Middle Eastern practice. I've seen it happen a lot in the streets. If you sit there and you spit and someone, if I'm unclean and I spit and it lands on Rebecca Ann's foot and then it goes, oh, you're unclean too now. Okay, because you don't know what's causing my random leaking. Okay? If they touch anything, in verse 12 it talks about if you touch anything that is clay, you break the pot. Why? Porous, okay? What I have could be infected in it, and then you're going to cook in it, or do whatever in it, it's not going to be good. Cleansing. I take 2 birds or 2 doves of pigeons, I make a sin offering and a dedication offering. Okay? It's the same sort of procedure that goes in. And then it goes on to, in verse 16, and if a man's intercourse seed will come out of him, he shall wash all of his flesh in water and be impure until evening. Okay? So, you are impure if you make love to your wife. That's what it says. It leaves your body. The semen leaves your body, you are impure.
Yeah, but that's not talking about making love to your wife. That's talking in the sense of leaking.
You reckon? If a man's intercourse seed will come out from him. So you reckon that's got nothing to do with making love?
No.
Yeah. That doesn't mean you.
Doesn't mean you're not. You're busy by yourself in the corner somewhere.
It's called a selfie.
A selfie. There's some rough places where you hang out.
You take red selfies.
Right? Any leaking.
But it's just until evening. You wash until evening. Happiness.
Right? This is not just talking about intercourse. Okay? Too many times, remember what I said? You sit there and you go, oh, when you make love to your wife, in a sense, the Holy Spirit leaves the room. Remember what I said? Some religions believe that. Okay? This is not the case. God made it very beautiful, very right. He just says, don't confuse it with worship. Okay? There is a very distinct difference between the Canaanites and the fertility cults and the way you worship me. Okay? Talking about leaking. So, if you have leaking problems, then, in instances, maybe you, I'm not even going to go into that. Let's switch off. Alright. He'll be washed and he'll be pure until evening. And a woman with whom a man will lie, and intercourse of seed, they shall wash with water, and they shall be impure until evening. Read your Bible. What does it say? Is my translation funny?
Which verse now? 20 till evening.
Verse 18. And a woman with whom a man will lie. Are they talking about sleeping? And when a woman will have an emission, her emission will be the blood in her flesh, and she shall be in impurity for 7 days, and the one who touches her will be impure. So then he goes on to talking about her menstrual cycle. Okay?
It's like just touching her on the arm.
But remember, the same place as if my wife gives birth to a baby. If I kiss her, I'm unclean.
No one's ever going to be king. You don't know.
Do you start to understand Isaiah? I'm an unclean man with unclean lips. I live among unclean people. I'm staring at our holy God. You have to understand there are certain purity laws where sometimes you need a wash. Good point, right? Remember the Middle Ages? Where all the ladies were all sitting there with the fans, and people used to think, oh, it must have been so lovely going to the balls. And they used to cover their faces and their masquerade parties. You know why they had the fans?
The breast things.
Their teeth fell out. They had no teeth. They covered them because they didn't clean. They didn't brush their teeth. So it was a way of saying, look at me, I'm pretty, but when I go smile, I've got 3 teeth. And then they go, oh, look at that lovely lady. Why do you think all the girls went to the young girl? Because later on, they didn't look so good. You look at these things like, I don't know if you guys have seen like the Tudors and things like that. And then they make this Middle Asian things like, oh, this is lovely. This is how we do it. This is, this is upper echelons. Look at the things historically. When you're talking about guys whose legs as well, that actually have frotting flesh, what is it, King Louis or whatever that dude was called, actually to the point that he stank. And yet, he still had wives, and they still did things. It was normal.
They also used to go to the bathrooms in the corner of their houses and funny stuff.
The Black Plague was not because of microbacteria. It was because of food. Okay, when you go to London and they take you on those tours, they said, there was a great fire that happened. I think it was in the 1600s. And there was a great fire that happened. And it burned like half of London down. That is actually what saved them. Because it burned away all the filth. They believed that rats brought it. Well, actually the rats were living with people and the people were really gross. If they followed biblical principles about washing, it's very simple. It stays clean. Okay? So, it is a physical thing, but also a spiritual thing. When my wife gave birth to my kids, I didn't stop hugging her, I didn't alienate her. I kissed her, I was happy. Look at my baby. But we need to understand that because of the pain that she went through was because of what we were talking about from the very beginning. She will be redeemed through childbirth. Until the evening, there is something wrong. When a woman goes through a cycle, it's a reminder of the fall.
Okay, I'm with you now because I was wondering, like, in today's time, like, what do we do to, like, become unclean? Yes, we sin, but we can't
It's
live
not
not
sin.
unclean.
It's not sin. It is a fallen condition of the body.
Okay.
Okay? This is it. There is no, you will go and declare your sin and you will make a sin offering and that's the end of it. Yes, there are certain sin offerings, but it doesn't put it in the same category. What it does is it separates you from a time. And remember, like I said, back then they didn't have things with wings on. Okay? They had rags. You would literally sit down on a rag. Remember, who was it? Laban. Hey?
Laban with Rachel.
Hey, you come in here. Says, no, don't mind if I don't get up. The lady cycle is upon me. He's like, okay, I'll wait outside.
I'm out of it.
It's like, crack on, I'm done. Hey? They knew that there were certain things that guys were like, okay, we don't understand how money. It's because that sort of thing, again, blood unclean.
But it's also, it can be like a physical reminder as well for your heart.
Absolutely. You have to worry about it. It's just about reminding us of the fallen state. And remember, there's consequences to what they're sin. We're still living with those consequences today. And God has to deal with those things to repair our bodies and all the rest of it. These things are reminders of cleanliness, as well as certain things that you need to be reminded about. When you're sitting there and you only have a rag to sit on to clog certain things, please do not go to temple. Do I really need to spell out why?
You're going to messy room?
Oh, Baruch Hashem! Not cool, man. Well, I need to put the images, like, this is practical as well. Oh, you're tickling. You too will have a wife one day.
Wait until your wives are baby.
No, please don't scare me. Please don't scare me. That's the one way of children.
No.
Okay? There are things that will make you unclean, okay? And you need to understand that there's physical and certain things, and he will go on about purification offerings and things like that that we've got to go through, okay? So you need to look at it. Now, I want to jump quickly, very quickly before I get beaten. I want you to jump to the New Testament references here, okay? There's a very interesting allusion to unclean people, unclean spirits. Okay? Mark 5 talks about when God, you can turn to Mark 5 if you want, right? Talks about when Yeshua crossed the river, crossed the Galilee.
Verse 2. Mark 5, verse 2.
Mark 5.
Mark 5, verse 2.
Verse 2. Oh, come on. him right on the other side of the lake in the Gerasenes territory, and as they disembarked, a man with an unclean spirit came out of the burial caves to meet him. Where have you heard of unclean spirit now in this entire time?
Leprosy.
Unclean man, not unclean spirit. So there's this illusion to anything that is in affinity with God, something that is impure.
But you said it's brought upon by and
Could be brought upon and by, otherwise it could just be fallen part of the body. So someone who is part corruption, who is broken, who is there. Okay? You have this unclean spirit. Now, this is a man on the other side of the lake. Remember, this is the capitalist region. Okay? Now, you understand a little bit about unclean. He came out of the burial caves where dead people are. Clean or unclean?
Unclean.
Unclean. He lived in the burial caves and no one could keep him tied up, not even with a chain. He had often been chained hand and foot, but he would snap the chains, break the irons off his feet. He was strong enough, no one was strong enough to control him. Night and day he wandered among the graves through the hills, howling and gashing himself with stones. Self-mutilation, blood, unclean or clean?
Unclean.
This is Captain Unclean of Unkosher Town.
Eating shrimp sauce, piggy.
Well, he's staying there, well, you'll see what's kept around. Okay? Yeshua, seeing from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him, screamed at the top of his voice, "What do you want from me? Yeshua, Son of God, Ha'elyon, I implore you in God's name, do not torture me." For Yeshua had already begun saying to him, "Unclean spirit, come out of this man." Yeshua asked him, "What's your name?" "My name is Legion," he answered. "There are so many of us." And he kept begging Yeshua not to send him out of that region. Out of that region, the capitalists. Because this is unclean towns. Now there was a large herd of pigs. Clean or unclean?
Unclean.
Unclean, feeding on a hill. And the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the pigs." Unclean spirit, unclean man, unclean spirit goes into unclean animal. Do you start to understand from Jewish perspective how unkosher this is? Okay? Biblically we shouldn't be here. Why are you farming pigs?
Well, it was the gods also.
Gods and food. They would sacrifice and they would eat of the flesh. Oh, wrong time, wrong issues. Everything that is unkosher, we are standing here. Sorry, this I'll get to. Okay? He said, "Send us into the pigs so we can go into it." Yeshua gave them permission. They came out and entered the pigs, and they heard the numbering of 2,000. They rushed down to the hillside into the lake, and they were drowned. The swineherds fled, and they told it to the towns surrounding the country. The people went to see what had happened. They came to Yeshua and saw the man who had the legion of demons sitting there, dressed in his right mind, and they were frightened. Those who had seen and told them what happened, and the man controlled by demons of the pigs, and the people began begging Yeshua to leave the district. As they were getting into the boat, the man who had been demonized begged him to be allowed to go with him. But Yeshua would not permit it. Instead, he said to them, "Go to your people and tell them how much Adonai, in his mercy, has done for you. I have made you what?
Clean.
Now you go show those people what the difference is by the way they're living in their corruptness, and you show them me." Okay? I want you to jump as well. Sorry, Des, I'll get to your fronts. Let's go to we're in Mark. I want you to scan down to, I think it's verse 28. Make a little bit for that. Go to verse 24, Mark 5. So he deals with uncleanliness there. He makes someone clean. He went with them, and a large crowd followed, pressing them all around him. Among them was a woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years. She was bleeding for 12 years. What does that mean for her? Can't go to temple. Can she have a husband, in a sense? Would anybody for 12 years continually? You can't. And had suffered a great deal under many physicians. Who was it that was supposed to make sure the cleanliness and uncleanliness?
Priests.
Priest. She had spent her life savings, yet instead of improving, she had grown worse. She had heard about Yeshua, who came up behind him in the crowd and touched his robe. Some Bibles say the hem of his garment. in Greek literally means twisted cord, is tzitzit. Remember what your tzitzit represents. Torah, 5 books of instructions, 4 letters of God, the royalty from heaven, everything that he is. So instead of going to physicians, she goes to God. For this, she said, if I touch even his clothes, I will be healed. Instantly, the hemorrhaging stopped and she felt that her body had been healed from the disease. At the same time, Yeshua, where the power had gone out from